Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. This is James Jacob Prash, of course, coming to you from the Far East. I'm in Vietnam at the moment with David Lister. He's in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, and I'm in Hanoi. We're not together, but we're in the same country at the same time. We're having connectivity issues with the internet. Connectivity is not all that great where we happen to be located at the moment. So please bear with us. We're doing the best we can to manage the poor connectivity situation. Hopefully, it won't close down or give out while we're speaking to you. In the meantime, very briefly, time-wise, I'm very pressed. I've been working with local believers in certain things I can't really discuss. I'm not at liberty to discuss it in any detail, but your prayers are much appreciated. Vladimir Putin was just here the same day I arrived, and it's very interesting to see what he's doing. He's trying to reconnect his old ties from the Cold War era, obviously with Cuba, with North Korea, and with Vietnam. I don't know how well it's going to work, but that is his strategy, and it's what he seems to be doing as the situation in the Ukraine is just dragged out. But what I'm looking at globally is something that's very disturbing and persuades me that there are spiritual forces at work on back of it. Of course, I've always enunciated that, but it's becoming more and more acute. We're getting reports of Israelis applying for American visas, work visas, green cards, even tourist visas being grilled and questioned at American consulates in Europe and elsewhere about military service in Israel. And asking questions, have you ever handled weapons or explosives? Have you ever fired them in a combat situation? Why? If you don't answer these questions within 90 days, you will face deportation. This is targeted towards Israelis, and it's a brand new policy, and it's never happened before. Now, the State Department knows Israel was attacked. It knows why people will be shooting back, but this is just harassment of Israelis coming to the United States to work. You'll find no such harassment, I assure you, of Saudi Arabians or anything of this nature, but it's targeted by the Biden administration, the Joe Obama administration against Israel. In the meantime, the liberal left-wing Jewish envoy sent by the Biden administration to meet with Mr. Netanyahu and meet with the Lebanese has left the situation worse than he found it. Mr. Netanyahu was for the first time beginning to speak out about the blockages of arms shipments and munitions and ordnance to Israel from the United States needed to continue its response to the Hamas attacks. Remember, the only reason this is dragging out so long in Gaza is because the Israelis are not guilty of what they're falsely accused of. They're not guilty of indiscriminately killing civilians. Had they been willing to pursue that kind of a policy, this would have been over months ago. The Israelis could end this very quickly if they only did what they're being falsely accused of. But they don't want to go down to the level of Hamas or their supporters. To see the litany of lies continually churned out by Hamas and their supporters being reported as if it was fact on the mainstream media tells you that there is a spirit on back of this trying to destroy Israel. Why? Why? Well, we know why. We've always known why. Daniel 10 tells us why. It is Satan trying to destroy Israel to prevent the return of Christ. Only now, for the first time, instead of being the instrument of God in supporting Israel, the United States is becoming an instrument of Satan and trying to destroy it instead of in supporting it. This is actually happening. They're withholding arms shipments. A deal for 50 new F-15s that had already been agreed is now being put on the back burner and held up by the Biden administration. They're putting these arms restrictions on Israel to try to prevent Israel from taking decisive action, not only against the elimination finally of Hamas, but of Hezbollah. Remember, Hamas has said and stated and has reiterated it no less than 4 times. There will be more October 7th attacks from the river to the sea. That is what Israel must never be. They keep saying that. And the Obama administration, the Joe Biden administration, is determined to see that Hamas survives to carry that out. That is what it essentially comes to. They don't want Hamas destroyed. Neither, of course, do they want Hezbollah destroyed. But the challenge of Hezbollah is even more impending in terms of what it could result in. The amounts of rockets and drones and aerial vehicles provided to Iran can reach anywhere in Israel and badly damage Israel's infrastructure, including bringing down its electric grid, its power stations, its water pumping stations, the basic infrastructure upon which Israel relies, both in terms of utilities and in terms of agricultural production for irrigation, are vulnerable. There would have to be a massive, very quick attack in order to prevent and preempt this from happening. And of course, the Biden administration, as ever, on the side of Israel's enemies, is doing all it can to be sure this doesn't happen. I am not exaggerating. I am not exaggerating. If it were not an election year and they could move further against Israel, they would do it. Remember, Barack Obama had the most anti-Israel administration in American history, setting the precedent of lobbying other countries to vote against Israel in the UNESCO vote, saying Israel has no right to any claims to the Wailing Wall, the Kotel, to any of its biblical sites. This was Obama, and it's being carried out by Biden. Being carried out even with the partnership of left-wing Jews like Blinken. This is what we are dealing with. But it is covering a panorama of expressions, not just in the media, not just in the policies of foreign governments, not just in the policies of the Biden administration and the State Department. It is happening even in the culture of celebrity. We have Eric Clapton, the rock blues guitarist, denouncing Israel. Now, Eric Clapton, once in a drunken stone stupor, began denouncing Black people and saying, "Keep Britain white," at a concert in Birmingham, England, even though he got his music from Black people by his own admission. He got his music from Buddy Guy and Robert Johnson and so forth, but he was saying, "Keep Britain white." In the words of Doc Holliday in the movie Tombstone and Vino Veritas, in drunkenness, people speak the truth about what they really think. Well, we know what Eric Clapton really thinks. He was really an anti-Black bigot. Well, now he's standing shoulder to shoulder with Roger Waters, says he supports Roger Waters in this biased position against Israel. Even more shocking is Candace Owen. I once fantasized about Candace Owen being the first female president of the United States. That's how much I loved her and esteemed her, and the admiration I had for her and her intelligence and her eloquence. In a debate with Rabbi Shmuel Boteach, a man who I am no fan of, he was supposed to debate me in Cambridge, and the debate was canceled on 48 hours' notice by him or by his organization, the L'Chaim Society. I'm no fan of Shmuel Boteach, but she publicly brings the accusation of blood libel against him, saying, "Are you drunk on Christian blood again?" What a thing for her to say. And then she goes on to assert that Jews were responsible for the assassination of JFK. Now, nobody has ever proposed this with any seriousness. It's always been the mafia, the deep state, the mafia in league with the CIA. Others have said it was Castro, the Soviets, but nobody has ever proposed it was a Jewish conspiracy. Now we have Candace Owen saying, well, there was one president of the United States who was assassinated because he wanted to make pro-Israeli Zionists register as a foreign uh, lobbyist organization, and then now he's dead. What a thing for her to say. It's coming from quarters one would never expect. Armenia, this week, recognized diplomatically so-called Palestine. Now, no nation other than the Jews has suffered at the hands of Muslims more than the Armenians. They had their own Holocaust, upwards of 2 million slaughtered by Muslims in the Turkish Islamic genocide against the Armenians. There is a large Armenian community in Jerusalem and in Haifa, living peacefully as Israelis under Israeli protection, secure. But you can still see graffiti on the walls in their neighborhoods and posters and things about the Holocaust perpetrated against them in the early part of the 20th century by the Muslims. Yet Armenia is taking the side of the Muslims against the Israelis, who've always empathized with them because they had a Holocaust, and protects them. How does one explain this? It's not logical. How are you going to recognize a Palestine, a nation that has never existed? Which Palestine? The Hamas Palestine in Gaza or the Fatah Palestine in the West Bank? Now, as far as the Fatah Palestine and the West Bank, as we've been saying, it's now into its 19th year. It'll soon be 20 years of Abbas with no election. There has been no election. He came in on a 4-year term, and he's been there nearly 20 years with no election. It is not a legitimate government. It is not a democratically elected government. Yet they're getting diplomatic recognition from countries who claim to be out to be voices of freedom: Spain, Ireland, now Armenia, of an unelected government. Despite the fact that 89% by their own polls, 89% of so-called Palestinian Arabs want Abbas to retire. Everyone knows if there was elections tomorrow in the West Bank that Hamas would win. They admit that. You could not explain such illogicality. There has to be a spiritual dimension to this growing hatred of Israel, this growing hatred of the Jews. Now, I know that God is allowing it. God is dealing with Israel because of their rejection of their Messiah. I know all that. I've always said that. But the framework of what is developing and transpiring is indisputably becoming more and more congruous by the day with what Zechariah chapter 12 said would happen, that all the nations would come against Israel. And under the Biden administration, that includes the United States. I fear the judgment of God on America because of the corruption of the American government and what it is doing. 20% of America is supporting Hamas, is anti-Israel. 80% is not, but the democratic will of the majority of the American people mean nothing. There are still people, including Jews, who will vote for Biden, even though he's doing what he's doing. It is unbelievable that when he gave the signal of American weakness to Putin by his mishandling of Afghanistan, and what happened? 13 being left, all of those arms being left to the Taliban. The same human rights abuses that being perpetrated against women and so forth by the Taliban that were taking place before Afghanistan was invaded in response to September 11th are back again, courtesy of Biden, who gave them the weapons. What Iran is doing, they've sunk another ship via the Houthis. Who gave them the money to do this? Iran. Who gave Iran the money? Joe Biden and Barack Obama. Their economy had been on the skids until Biden bailed them out, much the same as Obama bailed them out. In the week after the October 7th attacks, the response of the Biden administration was, we're going to send $100 million of aid to Gaza. Despite the fact that Gaza overwhelmingly, its population supported the October 7th attacks. How can you blame the victim for shooting back? But they blame the victim. This is beyond frustration. It's beyond explanation. Unless we look to scriptures and see the demonic nature of what's happening. Meantime, I'd point to something incredible taking place in Great Britain. At current projections, the British Conservative Party will have 53 seats in Parliament. 53. The Labour Party will have hundreds. The Conservative Party, the Tories, will have 53. They'll be on a par with the Liberal Democrats. Between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives together, they'll have about 103 seats. You can't explain this. They will literally, Labour will have more than 5 times as many seats in the British Parliament. The political left will have more than 5 times as many seats as the other parties put together. The Conservative Party is all but finished, at least in the foreseeable future. Something is definitely happening. I do not believe it is by any means assured, as I've said multiple times, that Donald Trump will win the election. God forbid Biden should, or any Democrat. But I do not believe a Trump victory is assured. We saw his personal failure, as well as the failure of the Rhinos and the Republican National Committee in the midterm elections in 2022, something they should have won handsomely, something where they should have had an overwhelming majority in the House, and they have the narrowest, and actually lost seats in the Senate, and that is personally due to the failed leadership of Donald Trump as much as it is to the failed leadership of Mitch McConnell, the Rhinos, and the RNC. Donald Trump is in large part responsible. He's as responsible as the rest of them. Dr. Oz. This is Donald Trump. Herschel Walker, a good guy, but not a senatorial candidate who could beat Warnock. And it's getting worse. We're now seeing that these bogus indictments against Mr. Trump and his former staff colleagues now facing prison time with this lawfare is beginning to affect independent voters. It's going to be a close election from current projections. Will they get rid of Biden? Many people think so. But even with Biden, it is a close election. Mr. Trump's victory is by no means secure. They thought a Republican sweep was for sure in 2022, and the opposite virtually happened. We found out that people like Newt Gingrich and people like Dick Morris, they didn't know what they were talking about. They have no credibility. They should not be paid any attention to anymore. They're losers. They're not serious pundits. Where is this going? God only knows. But what is for sure is, it is he who establishes kings and removes kings. I thank God that in all this turmoil and chaos and this uncertainty and this growing Jew hatred, that will be followed by a hatred of Christians. Now we have persecution of homeschoolers beginning in Great Britain over the creationist issue. So many other things. Where will it end? Well, we know where it will end. It'll end in victory. Not for the forces who Satan is controlling, not for the radical homosexual agenda lobby, not for the pro-abortion lobby, not for the anti-Israel lobby. It'll end in victory for Jesus and those who are truly his. He told us these things were going to happen. Not happen they will. Happen they are. These things are transpiring more and more quickly. We're not date setting. We're not being alarmists or sensationalists. We're just facing the facts. These election projections in England are unbelievable. What's happening in Great Britain, it's unbelievable. It is going to change the history of Britain and Europe and the English-speaking world and will impact the United States and NATO. And what's happening in the United States, a spirit of stupidity being given over to people who will vote for their own destruction. I'm very, very despondent until I read what Jesus said. He warned us ahead of time. It is happening. He is coming. Let us pray to that end. We have a work to do to prepare the way for his return. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be handing this over to my colleagues. God bless.